Well, fact the Gemara v'amai spek sveikahu. Why do you say that he's neman lo'isrolov? It's a spek sveika. Savik tachtav, savik ein tachtav, im tim slom tachtav, savik boinis, savik rotzen. We said that it has to
What
be.
line?
What?
What line are you on?
I'm starting again from the top of the page.
Oh, okay.
Just to recap what the Gemara is talking about.
All right.
Okay. So Gemara, it's again, says the Gemara that in that situation, it's a svek sveika because number one, we have a suffix if she was nivola tachtav or lav tachtav, was it before she was even married? And if it's before she was married, she would not be asura to her husband. And even if it was tachtav, even if she was nivola when she was married, but maybe it was bo'inus, maybe she was nansa, maybe it was not with her will, and therefore she should still be muteris. It's a svek svek. It's say she's muteris. So what's the pshat that Belazar says? If he's naman that she's a ba'ula, then she's automatically asur. What do you mean? It's a svek svek. A svek svek is muter. Says the Gemara, two cases: Eishes Kayin v'Bay Seima, Eishes Yisrael, who could go into Kavav, yeah, Kiddushin Pchusavas Gemashanu Gem Echad. So we explained that these are two cases where you only have one suffix. Either Eishes Kayin, there's only a suffix if it's tachta v'lav tachta, but there's no suffix of ratzon or einis because either way she's a surah to Eishes Kayin. Mashen Kain, and when it comes to Eishes Yisrael, if the father was makabel kiddushin for his daughter less than three years, then we said that it can't be that the ba'ula that she became a ba'ula lav tachta because then she wouldn't be a ba'ula right now because less than three the basulim are chayzrim, and therefore it must be that the bia happened after the kiddushin happened, and therefore it's definitely tachtav. And then the only question is, was it ba'inus or was baratzon? So we have two cases of where it's suffix echad. And based on the fact that we believe him that she's a ba'ula, okay, but now how did that happen? Well, when it's suffix echad, we say suffix d'orais l'chumra, and now we have a din of shavia nafshei chadicha d'yisura, and that's where the Gemara, I'm not going to go through the Gemara again, the Gemara said, what's the chiddush? We know the concept of shavia nafshei chadicha d'yisura from the case of the man that says, I was makadosh this isha. The Mishnah says that if a man says, if the man says, I was makadosh this isha, and she says, no, you didn't, she is mutter in his krivim, and he is usher in her krivim. It's a stira. They can't both be right. I mean, he can't be that he wasn't Makadisher and he was Makadisher. But we say that since she is saying that he wasn't Makadisher, she never made herself usher, and there are no Eidim that are being made right now. Now, obviously, when he says that he was Makadisher, he has to be saying he was Makadisher Be'edim. There had to have been Eidim there. Just the Eidim are not around. They went off to Colombia. They went. They died. Whatever it is, they're not here. So when he says, I was Makadosh this Isha, so we believe him le'inyan Isser. Shavia nafshei chaticha d'Isura, which means that, well, he can marry another woman because he's allowed to marry more than one wife in times of the Gemara. And secondly, in terms of Isser Erva, he will be usher to marry any of the relatives of this Isha. Because Shavia nafshei chaticha d'Isura, says the Gemara, what's the difference between that case and this case? It's the same thing. So what's Rabbi Elazar telling me? It's a Mishnah. So says the Gemara, the Chiddush was that over here, we say that even though Mao the same Deloy Kimle, we would have said that this is a concept which he's not aware of, he would not be able to have the reliability to be able to make the statement that she is a Ba'ula, because he's not familiar with Pesach Psuch Matzah, as the Gemara says later on. He was never married, possibly in this case. He's a Bachur, he's the first time he's getting married, so this is his first time having a bia, so he wouldn't necessarily know what it means to have a Pesach Sasum or a Pesach V'suach, and therefore one might have said that he's not really reliable, and we discount what he said at all. Says the Gemara, no, Shavi Anafsheh Chaticha D'Yisura, and we mentioned last week that is a Machlokes Rishonim, what the Kamash Malan is. Kamash Malan, the simple reading of the Gemara is, you would have thought he doesn't know what he's talking about, Kamash Malan, that we could trust him what he's talking about. Trust meaning we could say he's reliable, he knows what he's talking about. Rashi, we said, is not learning like that. Rashi seems to be learning that even though, yes, it's true, if he's saying that she is usher, so then, Shavia Nafsheh Chaticha D'Yisura, but maybe we would have said that since this is something which he may not have the knowledge about, maybe it's not Shavia Nafsheh Chaticha D'Yisura. Answers the Gemara, even though he may not be knowledgeable about this inyan, he's a panui, and he doesn't really know, but once he made the statement of, I found the Ba'ula, then there's a din of Shavi Anavshei Chaticha D'Yisura. So we have Machlokes Rishonim, Tosfos, and the Ritva, and others learn that in order to have Shavi Anavshei Chaticha D'Yisura, in order to have a din of Isser on yourself, you need to be reliable. So he has to be Kimle. If it's something which he is not knowledgeable about, then he would not have a din of Shavi and Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura. But according to Rashi, it seems that even though it's possible he's reliable and it's possible he made a mistake, still we say Shavi and Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura. Okay?
The bottom line is, even though there's a big suffix, he gets the benefit of the doubt.
Well, normally the benefit of the doubt means you're mutter. Here, he's right.
Of the doubt is the Yisura.
Okay, so here we're saying that since suffix deraisa l'chumra, therefore he'll be usher. Now, again, the suffix is not really a suffix because we don't necessarily believe him that she's a ba'ula. He's making a statement that she's a ba'ula. That's why we're involved in this concept of Shavi and Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura. So there's a whole discussion in the Achronim, like you mentioned, what exactly is this idea of Shavi and Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura? So first of all, let's talk about a little bit of the halachos of Shavi and Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura. So today's shiur, I don't think we're actually going to be learning anything in the Gemara right now. It's going to be a lot outside. In the old days, I would be giving out sheets for everybody but since we want everybody to be on the same page, no pun intended, the Zoom people, I'm not as sophisticated as I used to be with like screenshots and stuff like that. So I'll just tell it to you outside. The idea is that sharing my screen, right? We used to do that on the Zoom. So we'll just talk about outside these ideas. So first of all, the one question that is brought in the Rishonim is the concept of Shavi Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura going to work against Eidim? The Rashba and the Tshuva discusses the following case. We know that in order to eat meat, it needs to be shechted. So there was a situation of a guy who had a slaughterhouse and he was selling meat. Guy selling meat you don't really buy from, but I guess people there wanted to have shechted meat. So he hired a sheikhet to go ahead and shech the animals. So I guess that was back then they considered a humane way of killing animals. We still consider it a humane way of killing animals. It is a humane way of killing animals, but that was back then. So the guy hired a sheikhet to go ahead and shech the behemoths. So another yid knew that there was a sheikhet going ahead and shechting these behemoths. So he went over to the yid and he said to the sheikhet, I'd like to buy the meat from one of the behemoths you just shechted, even though it belongs to a guy, but I know you shechted it and therefore it's mutter. Sheikhet says, Lo hevel l'nivra, I never shechted this behemoth. Really? I thought you were sheikhet for this fellow. He finds Eidim, and those Eidim are made. We saw this man, this yid, we saw the sheikhet shech this behemoth. He says, the sheikhet says, I didn't shech this behemoth. The two Eidim say, we saw you shech this behemoth. So the Shoyo asked the Rashba, what do I do in this case? Is the yid allowed to go ahead and buy that meat? Is it considered kosher? Says the Rashba, Avada, Pishnayim Eidim Yakum Dav. That sheikhet is not neman against two Eidim. Two Eidim said they saw the shechita. This is the animal that was shechted. They can identify that this is the meat from that animal. So therefore they know. So it's the one. So we know this is the meat from that animal, and therefore it's mutter 100%. However, says the Rashba, the sheikhet is not allowed to eat. Because Shavi Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura. So in other words, Zak the Rashba, that Shavi Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura works even against Eidim, even though Eidim have made a statement that this behemoth is shchuta and therefore it's kosher. The sheikhet, once it's Shavi Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura, he's not allowed to eat it. Okay, so that's the Rashba's shita.
That's like nether.
Okay. So you're saying, okay, we'll talk about what's the reasoning behind it.
Okay.
There are Rishonim, there's a Taisri Zakin in Kiddushin that says beferish that Eidim are going to be Naman, and there no longer will be a din of Shavi and Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura. We don't have a Gemara Kiddushin in front of us. So I'll tell you from the Ritva over here. The Ritva over here says, in this Gemara, it's a little complicated, but bear with me. In this Gemara, it doesn't say what the woman's response is. It only says what the man's time is. So the man comes and says, I found that she's a ba'ula. Well, what's she saying? Is she corroborating his story, or is she saying something else? So if she's masking, so then we don't have to come out to Shavi Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura over here. Everybody's masking what happened over here. Elamai, she must be being makhish what he's saying. So she's saying, Lo hevel nivra, I was a basula the whole time. You made up the whole story. What you're saying is not true. Okay? So he's saying, you're a ba'ula, and she's saying, no, I'm a basula. Okay. So we understand, like the Gemara, like the Mishnah in Kiddushin. Well, you say one thing and he says something else. Well, okay, that's very nice, but Shavi Anaf Sheichaticha D'Yisura. So for him, it's Asur, and he's going to have to be Megarishu based on what he said. What he said was that you're a Ba'ula, and in this case, it's something else. And therefore, he's going to have to be Megarish. Fine. Okay. Asks the Ritva, what would be if she says it's true? Pesach Pasuach Matzah. However, the way that happened was I had an accident. I became Mukas Eitz. The Gemara talks about Mukas Eitz, that it could be that she had some kind of accident, and that's how the Basulim are not there. That's how she is not a Basula anymore. Yeah.
Why do you pick that case rather? Why not just say that she says that it's let's say the Kohen that it was prior to
or let's say by the Yisrael Misha Erestani Nasti. The Ritva gives all those scenarios. I'm just choosing one of them. Good question, but that's one of the scenarios. Okay, so fine. So she says, "Listen, I'm going to explain to you what happened, right? Mukaseitz or Misharastani Nanasti, or it was Lav Tachta, whatever it is, in order to go ahead and answer. I think the easiest way to say it is there was an accident, and therefore there's no issue of ksuba, there's no issue of anything, right? She was not considered a ba'ula. Okay. Says the Ritva, in that case, then there's no longer a din of Shavi Nafshech Chadich, because he's basically saying, I don't know what happened. He can't argue with her. He can say, no. What happened was not Mukaseitz. Well, you weren't around when it happened. All you know is right now. You're coming in the middle of the story, and you're saying Pesach Pasuch Matzasi. So you can't say now, I know it wasn't Mukaseitz. You didn't know anything. And she says, I do know there was Mukaseitz. It's a discussion in the Rishonim exactly why she's Ne'emanes, Rosh, and the Rashba later on. But we can understand why she'd be believed. Okay, so many of the Rishonim say, most of the Rishonim say in that case, where she's explaining, she is believed. The way that the Rush says it is Bari V'Shema Bari Adif. She's a Bari. She's explaining how the Pesach is Pesuach, and he's a Shema. He's saying maybe not Bari V'Shema Bari Adif, and therefore there's no din of Shavi and Nafshech D'Isur. Asks the Ritva the following question. We know there's a concept called Migul. So he says Pesach Pesuach Matzasi. She says Pesach Pesasu. Believe me that I was not a Pesach Pesuach because I could have said Mukaseitz. And you wouldn't have had a din of Shavi and Nafshech D'Isur. Fractor Ritva. So why don't you have a Migul? Yeah.
for the Mamanas, in other words, the Migul for her,
Right.
she's, we don't believe him.
Good. She'll win. She'll win with the Migul.
He's weak.
You're using the Migul, her Migul, depending on him. It's sort of like a different, that's not the way. Generally, Migul is, because I could have said something to benefit me.
So Rabbi Chanan declares a chakir, which we've mentioned before. Is the koach of Migul a ne'amonus or is it a koach hataina? So you're understanding it's a koach hataina. It's leverage. I have the ability to make a taina mukaseitz and I would win with that taina. So believe me, when I make my taina of I was a pesach sasam, I was a basula, and I have the leverage of the other taina to go ahead and make that taina and win in Beis Din. That's one way to understand Migul, but the Ritva is clearly not understanding Migul as such, but rather that it's a form of ne'amonus. It's a reason to believe me. Ma li l'shati, says in many places. Why else would I lie? So it's a form of ne'amonus. We've even discussed that sometimes you'll say in a certain scenario it's a malil l'shakir, in another scenario it's a koach hataina. We've discussed that from Rabbi Chanan. Okay, so we're understanding right now that it's an ne'amonus. So she is believed. She has a believability that she was a basula. Why? Because she has the ability to make the taina of mukaseitz, and she would be believed, and she would not be a surah to him. There would be no din of shavi and avshe. So she has a migul. Says the Ritva, it's not a migul because mukaseitz is not shchiach. It's not so common. Now, what he means, it might be common, but the point is that in such a situation where she hasn't said anything about it until now, it's not so common that that's really what happened. That's Pashas what he means, and he discusses that. Zakta Machan Ephraim. What is the Ritva asking? What do you mean that if there was a migul, then there would be no Shavi and Avshech Chaticha D'Yisura? Would the Rashba ever agree to such a question? Says the Machan Ephraim, the Rashba would never agree to that question, because the Rashba says that even if you have Eidim that are going against you and saying what you're saying is wrong, there's still a din of Shavia Nafsha Chaticha Yisura. What's better, Migu or Eidim? Zok the Machan Ephraim. If the Ritva is asking that if Migu works, that he's not going to have a din of Shavia Nafsha Chaticha Yisura, then Kol Shekain, he would hold if Eidim showed up that he wouldn't have a din of Shavia Nafsha Chaticha Yisura. So Zok the Machan Ephraim, based on this Ritva's question, so it's not really important to us right now how the Ritva answers the question. It's the fact that he asks the question and his response is not, well, too bad, Migu doesn't work over here. No, he clearly understands that Migu does work over here. And it's very interesting. A lot of the Rishonim discuss the first part of the Ritva, which is she doesn't, the Gemara doesn't say what she says. What would be the halacha depending on what her response is? And they generally say the same thing, Bari V'Shema, some form of that, but they don't ask the kasha of Migu. They don't ask the kasha of Migu. The Rashba, when he goes to this discussion, he doesn't ask the kasha of Migu. Zok the Machan Ephraim. You know why? Because Migu's not going to help. The same way Edom doesn't work according to the Rashba. You're still Shavi on Rashba Chaticha Yisura. Migu's also not going to change the story. It's only when I have an actual Bari V'Shema, an actual Taina that I'm explaining the story. The story was that there was a Mukasaitz, and I'm Neman to say Mukasaitz. That's where we say there's no Shavi on Rashba Chaticha Yisura because we don't really have a suffix over here. But in a situation where you're trying to believe to the Migu, says the Rashba, that doesn't work, just like Edom doesn't work. But the Ritva that asks the Kasha must hold that in that case of the Rashba, the Sheikhet would be allowed to go ahead and eat from the meat. Because if Edom come and they say, that bus is shchuta, they're saying the bus is kosher, there's no longer a din of Shav and Avshach Chaticha Yisrael, Pishnai Medim, Yakum Davar. So the Chayr we have at least a Machlekes Rashba and Ritva, and probably there are other Rishonim that would weigh in on these two sides of the coin. So how would we understand this Machlekes? Do we say Shavi Anafsha works against Edom, or does it not work against Edom? Okay, so that's one of the scenarios that is discussed. The Ketzos talks about another scenario. What happens if, let's say, the person comes in saying Pesach Pesuach Matzasi, but he thinks that it's just an issue of Mamonis. He wants to amend the Ksuba. He wants to make sure that the Ksuba is the right Ksuba. He's concerned because it's a Ksuba Spasula, and she turns out to be a Ba'ula, and he likes his paperwork to be all in order. So he says, this paperwork doesn't seem to be in order. We have to go ahead and change the Ksuba. And he comes to Beis Din, and Beis Din says, well, actually, you've created more of a problem over here because you realize now there's a Shaila of Isser. Now we have a question that if she is a Ba'ula, maybe it's Ba'ula Tachtav, and then we have a question of Znus, and she's a Surah Lecha. And he says, what? She's a Surah? No, I never said that. I wasn't trying to make her Asura on me. I didn't even realize by saying that she's going to be Asura. Is there a din of Shavi on Avshech Chaticha Yisur? Says the Ketzos, if you understand that the concept of Shavi on Avshech Chaticha Yisur is a concept like a neder, then we would say that if he doesn't know that what he's saying is making her Asur, then it can't be a neder. It can't be that he is forbidding this woman on himself if he doesn't even realize that you can't make a neder without knowing you're making a neder. So if we understand the elementary understanding of Shavi Avshech Chaticha Yisura, that it is a form of neder, that is some form of neder, that is a person actively forbidding something, then he would have to have specific knowledge that what he's doing is saying that she is a surah. And the Gemara just says, Ha'omer Pesach Pasuach Matzasi. Now the Shita over here says, what does Naman La'oisra Alav mean? Ha'omer Pesach Pasuach Matzasi, Naman La'oisra Alav. So the Shita learns in one shot that, you know what that means? It means that he came to Aser. Since he Naman La'oisra Alav, he's Naman if he's coming to Aser her. But says Rashi, he's not Naman Lafsida Ksubasa. He's not Naman to be master the Ksuba. In other words, what Rabbi Lazar is saying is that if you came with the agenda of Asering, so then she's going to be Asura. So that would be a raya to the way of learning Neder. Because it's only because he's coming Lo Isra, he's Naman Lo Isra Lav. But if he wasn't coming Lo Isra, he wouldn't be Naman Lo Isra Lav. But the Shita gives another shot, and he says, no, he was just coming to say Pesach Psuch Matzasi, because those are the words he says. And Rabbi Lazar comes and says, you that are saying Pesach Psuch Matzasi, and there are dinim that are yotzim from that. Number one, she might be asur lacha. Number two, you might lose the ksuba. Comes Rabbi Elazar and says, Neman lo Eisra alav. What about Ksuba? Says the Gemara Namid Beis. Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel says, Neman lefsida Ksubasa. And then we have Machlekes Rashi Tosfos. Do Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel agree to each other, to argue on each other? That's for another day. Fine. So says the K'tais, if you're going to learn that it's a halacha of neder, then you have to know what you're talking about. You have to know that you're answering. If you didn't know you're answering, then it wouldn't be a din of Shavi and Afshech Chaticha D'Yisura. And says the K'tais, I have many rayas that it's not true, that the din of Shavi and Afshech Chaticha D'Yisura is not dependent on knowledge. And the simple raya is the fact that the Gemara doesn't say that you have to specifically say that. I understand in the mission of Kidashtich, we would understand that everybody is familiar with the fact that the Torah says that there's an Isser of Arayis. But Pesach Pesuch Matzasi, he might not be thinking about the fact that if she's a Be'ula, that might mean that she was Mizana Tachtav. He might just think about the physical Metzias, that she's not a Besula, and therefore it affects the Ksuba. It's not clear in the Gemara that he's specifically coming to Aser, and therefore to learn that the din of Shavia needs Das to Aser, that would be very shver. That would be very shver in this Gemara and other Gemaras, and therefore the K'tzai says we're not going to learn that the Pshat in Shavia and Afshech Chaticha D'Yisura is a gather of Neder. It's not like a halacha of Neder where I'm actually coming to Aser, but rather it's a halacha of some other din of Shavia and Afshech Chaticha D'Yisura, which we'll get to in a second. The second question that's asked on the Mahalach of understanding Neder is we know there's a concept called She'ela. I can be She'el on a Neder. And we know that when it comes to Shavi and Afshech Chaticha D'Yisura, once you've said it, it's done. There's no going back on Shavi and Afshech Chaticha D'Yisura. If it's a halach of Neder, you could be She'el on the Neder. So therefore, there are kama rayas that we're not going with the Mahalach of Neder. Okay, so what is the Nemanus of Shavi and Afshech Chaticha D'Yisura? Says the K'tzais, we have a concept in the Torah called Vidas Baldin K'meya Edim. Where do we learn Hodas Baldin K'mei Edim? From the Pasuk. Pasuk says, Asher Yomar Ki Huzeh, that Ad Elohim Yavad Vashdehim. So there's a halacha called Meidav Miktzas. What's Meidav Miktzas? If I come over to you and I say, you owe me $100, and you say, I owe you 50, Meidav Miktzas Taina Yishava. The person that's Meidav, the Nitva that says, I owe you 50, so he has to take a shvur that he doesn't owe the other 50. So he pays the 50, and the other 50 he takes a shvur. And the Gemara explains what's the reason why. Because the 50 that he said he owes, so now he owes. But when it comes to the other 50, so now we say, Ishtamuti kam ishtamit mineh, he's just trying to get away from him, and he really would have been made to everything, and therefore we put a shvul on him, the Gemara in Bava Metzia and Daf Gimel that we did 2 years ago. Yeah, okay. Says the K'tzais, so we have a concept called Haidas Baldin Kimeya Edim, that a person is neman on his moment to say, I owe money. So when I come and I say I owe $50, a person is neman about his own money that he owes that money. Learns from Asher Yomar Ki Huzeh. Says the K'tzais, the same thing applies to Isser. The Torah is telling us that when a person speaks about his mammon or his status of Isser, he has an emanus about himself, bein b'mammon, bein b'Isser. That's the din of Shavia Nafshei Chaticha D'Yisura. Hadas Baldin K'mei Edim. Says the K'tzais, the only problem is the pasuk is talking by mammon. Asher Yomar Ki Huzeh is discussion about mammon, and he goes through a number of different possibilities of why he would be able to go ahead and possibly be neman by Isser, but he's left with a tzarich iyun why it is that when it comes to Isura Shavia Nafshei Chaticha D'Yisura, we would number one say he's neman about himself, and number two say he's even neman against Edim. The K'tzais' understanding is another pashut, like that Rashba that we saw, that he is Neman in Shavi and Afshech Chaticha D'Yisura, even against Edim. That is the K'tzais HaChoshen's way of understanding, and many Achronim learn that that's the pshat in Shavi and Afshech Chaticha D'Yisura, that it's a gather of a Hodas Baldin. The same way I'm Neman to say that I owe you $50, and now I owe you $50, I can't go back on it. So too, when it comes to Isser, if I say, this is an Isser right now, this meat is Asr on me, this woman is Asr on me, even though you haven't given any proof to corroborate the fact of what you said, once you've said it, Shavi Nafshei Chaticha D'Yisura, a person is Neman al Atzma.
But then the issue is Das. In the case of Ki Huzeh, there's Das. If he makes Shavi Nafshei D'Yisura, and he said, oh, I regret saying that because had I known the consequence of my statement, I may never have said it to begin with. That was the das he was saying before.
Correct.
In a sense, what we're saying is we don't care. If you once you make that statement, das or no das, mistake or no mistake, you're stuck.
Correct. There's even a discussion, once you bring it up, there's even a discussion when it comes to mammon. If you come to me and you say that I owe you $100, and I say, never happened, I never borrowed $100 from you. And then two Adam come and say, you borrowed $100 from him. And then I come back and I say, parati, I paid the $100. Both of them are a kofer hakol, and kofer hakol is usually neman. Says the Gemara, you're not neman in that case. You know why? Because kol ha'omer lo livisi, ka'omer lo parati. When you said I never borrowed, then you're also saying you never paid it. So you can't come back and say, oh, Adam say I borrowed it? Okay, I paid it. Because by saying lo livisi, you're admitting you didn't pay it. So that's really what you're saying, what you're bringing up, which is he wasn't trying to express that he never paid the money. All he was saying was I never borrowed. But Chazal or Yored L'Soif Daito, if that means, if you're telling me that you didn't borrow, then you're also saying you didn't pay. So you can't come back another day and say you're going to pay. That's a halacha noidas baldin.
But the idea there is that you have a chazaka for nemanus. Once the Eidim come, your chazaka for nemanus is put into question.
Well, you have an emanus to be kofer bakol. In other words, if Eidim come and say, this guy borrowed $100, see, he still has, as long as it's not a makom, as long as the other guy doesn't have a star. So you still have an emanus to say parati, as long as it's not a place.
No, what I'm saying is, the key thing is what he said.
Yes.
He said if he said, yes, I did borrow,
correct,
and I also paid back,
that's fine.
The Eidim came and say, you borrowed, okay, that's half the story.
Right.
But if he says, I never borrowed,
right, so
Eidim come
he backed himself into a corner.
Then he himself, himself, is an 8-check error.
That's a Hadas Baldin. It's a Hadas Baldin that you weren't parei. So there's a discussion if that applies by the concept of Isura as well. Some of the Achronim take on as Dara Pashat that halacha does not apply when it comes to Shav and Nafshe Chaticha Isura. But again, there's a Rashba later on that says it does apply. So that's another point of contention. If the Ktsois is right, that the concept of Shav Yanafshe Isur is really the same thing as Hadas Baldin, so then why aren't the halachos the same? That's a discussion to itself. I have just a general problem with it, because why are there two halachos if it's one halacha? Why is something called Shavya Nafshe Chaticha D'Isura when really it's Hodas Baldin Kimei Eidim? Hodas Baldin Kimei Eidim doesn't have to mean Hodah to Mammon. I'm moided that there's an Isser. So Hodas Baldin is Kimei Eidim. It's one din. Why does the Shas always call it Shavya Nafshe Chaticha D'Isura? The implication is that there's something else going on over there. Okay, that's a ha'ara, but l'maisa, many Gedolei Achronim understand that the concept of Shavya Nafshe Chaticha D'Isura is a concept of nemanus, of Hadas Baldin Kimei Eidim. Okay. The Trumas Hakri, I believe he was the Ktsois's brother-in-law, he discusses the following situation. Okay, we're going to jump off into a totally different sugya right now. Okay, we're going back to Baba Kama, Maruba. Okay, so there's a concept of knas. One of the concepts of knas is kefil. One of the examples of knas is kefil. So we know that when a person he has to go ahead and pay double. That's the din of kefil. Okay. So the Ravid says, what happens in a case where a person is moide? We know the halacha is moide b'knas is pater. So if he comes to Beis and he says, I stole, so he's only going to be chayiv the keren, he's not going to be chayiv the kefil. If two Eidim come and chap him, Himatzei Timatzei, says the Gemara, Himatzei be'edim, if he's chapped with Eidim, so then he got to pay kefil. Okay. What happens if he comes to Beis Din and he's moide, and we have the halacha of moide b'knas? Then what's the din? Says the Ravid halacha is moide b'knas ve'achach bo Eidim is pater. Okay. Says the Ramban, it's very nice that the Ravid paskin like that, but this halacha is not nagei anymore. Why not? because we don't have a real halacha based in anymore, because we don't have smuchim. The concept is that in order to have the ability to pati yourself from knas, you have to be able to have the ability to be machayiv yourself in knas. And since our bati dinim don't have the ability to be machayiv in knas, therefore a hodah is not going to pati you from knas. That's what the Ramban says about what the Ravid says.
There's no knas now, so what is, so the
So it would be nogeya in a situation where Yibana Beis Hamikdash, and after he was moed b'knas, so now we have smuchim all of a sudden, and then we'll be able to go ahead and be mechayiv in knas. What's going to be the din over there? Moed b'knas ve'achar kach bo'ed. Yeah. So what's going to be the din over there? Okay. So Ramban says it's not negeya. Frak Sakri, why is it not negeya? Hodas baldin can be in front of Edim, not only in front of Beis Din. The halacha is that if you're moed in front of Edim, if you you say to two Edim, I'm chayiv to this fellow $50, so Hodas baldin can be Edim. You're chayiv to $50. So Fekter Ramban, okay, so let's say nowadays we don't have a halacha of Beis Din, we have 3 dayanim sitting there. Beseder. But the din of Hodas baldin still applies. There still is a halacha of Hodas baldin can be Edim when you're standing in front of 2 Edim. So why is the Ravid's din? Why is the Ramban saying that the Ravid's din is not negay anymore? Says the Trumas Sakri that there's a difference between a hodah b'fnei Beis Din and a hodah b'fnei Edim. What's the difference between a hodah b'fnei Beis Din and a hodah b'fnei Edim? Says Trumas Sakri. I'm first going to tell you his cryptic lashon, and then we'll try to explain it. Hodah b'fnei Edim is midin ne'manus. Hodah b'fnei Edim is midin shav yanav shechaticha d'isur. One thing we've learned from the Trumas Sakri is that shav yanav shechaticha d'isura is not ne'amanus. According to the K'tzais, the whole din of shav yanav shechaticha d'isura is hodas baldin kimeya Edim, which is a halacha of ne'amanus. Says the Trumas Sakri that halacha of hodas baldin kimeya Edim splits. If you're in Beis Din, it's nemanus. If you're in front of Edim, then it's like shav yanav shechaticha d'isura. So now, what does that mean? So Trumas Sakri explains later on. When Edim come and say something, the Torah says, Al pi shnayim Edim yakum davar. So we understand yakum davar means it's like the final word. Yakum davar. That's the way it is. But really, there's a lot more to that yakum davar. You know what yakum davar means? Yakum davar means we hear the story and we believe the story as the Edim told us. In other words, if Edim come in and say, Ruvain borrowed $100 from Shimon on Tuesday in a halva of $100, so Beis Din hears and believes and now knows that there was a transaction of a loan between Reuven and Shimon for $100. If a man comes in, if Ruvain comes in, and he says to Beis Din, or let's say he says it in front of Edim, I borrowed $100 from Shimon. Is Shimon, are the Edim hearing that there was a loan of $100 from Reuven to Shimon? From Shimon to Reuven? Or are the Edim simply hearing that Reuven is chayiv $100? How he became chayiv $100? I can't believe him necessarily in terms of the details of the case of how he became chayiv that $100. Hodas baldin kimeya Edim just means that I'm believed about the fact that I owe money to somebody else. How you got to owe that money? Your shore was mazik his shore. So now you owe him $100. So what's the hodas baldin? The hodas baldin is the chayiv $100. Not that your shore was mazik his shore. If Edim came and said his shore was mazik the shore, then we have Edis that his shore was mazik the shore. Not only is $500, we have a discussion about the shore. The shore might turn into a shore muad, but in terms of the Eid Echad, in terms of the amonos of the story, again, in terms of Adas Badin, maybe it'll be neged to make the shore muad because it's being mafsid himself. But in terms of the halacha of listening, of being ma'am in him, you don't necessarily believe the whole story, you just believe that he's chayiv the money. Says the Trumas Sakri, that's the difference between Hodas baldin in front of Beis Din and Hodas baldin in front of Edim. If a person comes and makes a statement in Beis Din, then the nemanus is nemanus. You're believed on what you said. which means the whole story gets recorded in Beis Din. But if it's a Hadah in front of Eidim, then we don't believe the story. We just know that you're chayiv the money. Says Trumas Akri. Now we can understand what the Ramban said about the Ravid when it comes to Knas. When it comes to a person showing up in Beis Din and making a statement, I stole money. What's he going to be chayiv? He's chayiv the carrot. Says the Trumas Akri. Let's say there was no halach of moed b'knas potter. Let's say moed b'knas chayiv. If you come and you say, I stole money, the only way I'm going to be chayiv knas is if I'm believed that I stole money. But if all you believe is the fact that I owe money, I'm not going to be chayiv knas. So says Trumas Akri, without the halach of moed b'knas, if a person went in front of Eidim and said, I stole money from Yankel, he wouldn't be chayiv knas. Because all you believe him about is the fact that he owes him $100. But you don't know how he owes him $100. What do you mean? He told you that he stole it. Yeah, but telling you he stole it doesn't mean you believe him that he stole it, so there's no chiyuv of kefil. But if he would have said it in front of Beis Din, if he would have gone to Beis Din and said, I stole money from you, I stole $100 from Yanko. So what is Beis Din here? He stole money from Yanko. So not only does he owe $100, he owes the kefil. Comes the Torah and says, moed b'knas is potter. Since your hoidah was in front of Beis Din and you were moed before Eidim came, therefore moed b'knas is potter. So therefore, Zok the Trumas Akri, that's what the Ramban was saying. Since nowadays we don't have Beis Din, so you have no ability to go ahead and be moed in Beis Din, to go ahead and potter yourself, because that's the only way to discuss knas is by being in Beis Din, because that's the only time we listen to the whole story. But if it's a Haidah B'fnei Eidim, which our Beis Din is like a Haidah B'fnei Eidim, so then we don't believe the whole story. Okay. So now we can take that back to Shavia Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura, and we'll say what the Trumas Akri is saying is that Shavia Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura is like the case of Haidah Baldin B'fnei Eidim, not like the case of Haidah Baldin B'fnei Beis Din. So that means that when this fellow comes and says Pesach P'such Matzasi, and that means she's going to be Asur Love, because if what you're saying is true, then she's Eshes Kain in this case, Shenensa. Really, all we believe is that she's Asura. But we don't necessarily believe the pratim of the case. We don't believe the Pesach Pasuch Matzah. All we have is a person making a statement to us that since Pesach Pasuch Matzah, therefore subject to Reis L'chomra, and therefore she's an Isha Asura line. So what do we hear? Isha Asura line. We don't hear the story of Pesach Pasuch Matzah, and therefore there's a Shaila of Znus. We don't hear that whole story. So according to the K'tzais, when we have Shavia Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura, it's Nemanus. I hear the whole story. According to the Trumas Akri, we don't hear the whole story. All we hear is the bottom line of the story. So that's the Yisodistic of Machlekes and understanding what Shavia Nafshei Chaticha D'Isura is. Before we go further with that, there's an important Rabbi Kiva Eger that also weighs in on this question. If you turn, so we are going to use our Gemaras. If you turn to the second parak, we're going to jump from Mishnah to Mishnah in the second parak. The second parak starts on Tes Vav Amud Beis. So turn to Tes Vav Amud Beis. At the bottom, the Mishnah says, Ha'isha shenis armala o shenis garsha, hi omeres besulah nesasani, v'hu omer lo kiel almana nesasich, im yesh edim sheyatzmi, nu mevrosha peruk sebasam masayim, v'yabrachim and broika omer afchil klayas raya. Fine. So there's a whole discussion. Was she a basula? Was she not a basula at the time of Nisuin? So is he chayv a ksuba of Masayim or not? That's the discussion in the beginning of the Mishnah. The Mishnah continues. Umayder b'shua be'omer lechaveiro sadezu shavicha haisa ulakachtia hemenu shehu neman shapesha aser hu hapesha hitter. Says the Mishnah, there's a concept called hapesha aser hu hapesha hitter. What's the concept of hapesha aser hu hapesha hitter? If you come to me and you say to me that I am holding a karka that belongs to your father, so now I have to produce a shtar that says that I bought it from your father, because you're making a tvion. But if I come over to you and I say to you, you don't realize this, but this sada that I'm on right now, it used to be your father's, and I bought it from him. And then he turns around and says, what? It used to be my father's? So then how do I know you bought it from him? Pesha aser or pesha hitter? You don't know anything about the Sada. You only know because he said so. HaPesha also that said, Sada Zushavicha Isa, said, Ulakachtia Mimenu, that I bought it from him. HaPesha Aser, Hu HaPesha Hiter, and therefore the Mishnah continues, V'im yesh Edim Shishalav, V'hu Milakachtia Mimenu, Einonem. If there are Edim that it was the father's Sada, so now you're not relying on me anymore, then it's not a Pesha Aser or a Pesha Hiter, and therefore he's going to have to bring a proof that he bought it from the father. Okay? So we're all clear on this concept? HaPesha Asar Hu HaPesha Hiter. If
There's
you
consistency.
inform the concept of this was your father's Sada, now you're also now meant to say, and I bought it from him. But if you're not the one that informed us about it, so then you're going to have to bring a riot. HaPesha Asar HaPesha Hiter. So there are no more than three, but we're going to talk about three dinim of Pesha Asar Pesha Hiter. So we have this case, Sada Zusha Avicha Isa Ulkachti Amen. Now turn to Chaf Beis Amud Aleph.
But the notion of Edim there is, when did the Edim actually come?
It's good. That's a discussion in the Gemara. Did the Edom come after he came or before? The Pashut, let's learn the Mishnah. Pashut, Im Yesh Edom, if the Edom already were made, that it was the other person's father's, so then there's no Pesha Asar Pesha Hiter. Let's learn it like that. That's a discussion. Chaf Beis Amud Aleph now. The Mishnah on Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, right in the middle. Chaf Beis, 22a. Ha'isha she'amra. A woman says, Eishus ish hayisi. I was an Eishus ish, ugrushani, but now I'm a grusha. So if she's an Eishus ish, she's a surah, right? But she says she's a grusha, so she's muteris. Says the Mishnah, she's nemenes, sha'pesha asu, ha'pesha hiter. The mouth that's telling us she was an Eishus ish is also telling us that she's a grusha from that. So she's muteris. V'im yesh edim sha'is Eishus ish, v'yameres grushani, ein an nemenes. If we have Edim that she's an Eishus ish, and now she's saying, oh, by the way, I'm a grusha, she's not nemenes because there's no pesha asa pesha hiter. Okay? So that's case number 2. Case number 3. Mishnah continues. Amra nishbesi. The halacha is that if a Bas Yisrael was taken captive as a shvuya by Goyim, she is asura lekahuna. Because if she was nivala la'akum, so then that makes her a zayna, makes her asura l'kuhuna. So anytime we have a shavuya, ishbesi, so now we have a chashash that she's not tahira anymore, she's not mutaris l'kuhuna. So what happens if a woman comes and says, I'm going to tell you a chiddush, I'm going to tell you something that you don't know, nishbesi. I had a period of time that I was taken as a shavuya, but tahirani, but nothing happened to me. Says the Mishnah. Nishbesi Tairani Nemenes. Shapesha Asua Pesha Hiter. You don't know that she was a Shvuya. She told you she was a Shvuya. So the pad that told you she's a Shvuya is telling you that she is Tahira, and therefore she is Muteris. Vim Yeshedim Shenishbes, Vihi Omeres Tairani, Aina Nemenes. But if there are Edim that she was Nishbes, then she's not Nemenes to say Tahirani, then you'd have to have Edus that she's a Tahira, and that's the whole discussion in the Gemara over there.
Being a shuya, isn't that within the confines of an onus?
Yes, but for a kohen, it doesn't make a difference, right? Nivala l'pasala is psula l'kahuna. If nivala l'akum, lav tachtav, it doesn't make a difference. It's going to pasala l'kahuna.
Onus or ratzon doesn't make a difference.
Correct. If it's nivala Yisrael, then she's not psula l'kahuna. But if she's nivala l'akum, anybody who's pasala, then that pasala l'kahuna. Okay. So we have 3 cases of pesha asa hu pesha hiter. So in Rabbi Kveger wrote ha'aras on Mishnayos called Tosfos Rabbi Kveger. So in the Mishnayos, Rabbi Kveger asks the following question on the Mishnah on Chav Beis. Says Rabbi Kveger, I don't understand something. The Mishnah says that when you say Eishus ish hayisi ugrushani, you're Naman, why? Because ha'pesha asar hu ha'pesha hiter. Fact, Rabbi Kveger, why you believed to say you're an Eishus ish? Shavya anafshecha ticha d'yisur. Says Rabbi Kveger, did she come to base and say she's a surah, or did she come to base and say she's muteris? She came to base and said she's muteris. She never said she's a surah. So why do you need pesha asa pesha hiter? Azay factor b'kiveger. And he says even more, it's more severe in the last case. Because Eishus ish is Eishus ish. but she says nishbesi. Shvuya is not a surah. Shvuya, once we know she's a shvuya, oh, so now we're machzik that if she was under the shvuya of goyim, then mistama they were bala. But shvuya itself is not a statement of isser, so there's no shavi and amshachat isser. So what do I need? Pesha asa, pesha yitter. Zayk factor b'kiveger is left with the tzarchiyah. So the kasha is, why didn't Rabbi Kiveger ask his kasha on the first Mishnah in the second parak? The guy comes and says, he's also not saying that it's your mammon. He's saying I bought it from him. So why do you need a pesha asa, pesha yitter? Oh. So what's the chiluk? Shumas akri. The din in the beginning of the second parak is halacha of Haidas Baldin by Mammon in Beis Din. The din of the Mishnah of Beis is Shav Yanav Shechaticha de Yisura. That's like a Haidas Baldin in front of Aiden. What's the difference? The difference is, do you believe the story or do you not believe the story? Memela Frekter B'Kiveger. In the first Mishnah, I don't have a problem because that's Haidas Baldin in front of Beis Din. So we believe the story. So when you come in and you say, we believe your words. This Sada belonged to your uncle's father. So how do you have it now? Now you're up the creek. What are you going to do? So the Mishnah, Hapesha Asar, who Hapesha Yitter. Now I have to come on to Hapesha Asar that I believed when you said it was Sada was the uncle's, whereas the uncle's father's. Oh, so now I have to believe you that you bought it from him. Pesha Asar, Pesha Yitter. But factory Kiveger, when it's Shavi Anafshe Chatirah Yisur, what did you say? You said Yisi Grushani, which means you're Mutaras. So you never said you're Aser. What's the Ketzais going to say? What are you talking about? Shavi Anafshe Chatirah Yisur is Ne'amanus. So when you come and you say Eshes Isha Yisi, Shavi Anafshe, we believe the story. That means you're an Eshes Ish. So what's your Ne'amanus afterwards to say Grushani? It's the Mishnah, the same thing as the first Mishnah. It's Pesha Asua Pesha Yitter. Nishbesi, if you're Nema that you're Nishbesi, you're a Shvuya. If you're a Shvuya, you're Psul Lakuna, because there's a Chazaka, you're an Ivala Lagai. So the Mishnah, no, because HaPesha Asua Pesha Yitter. But Frekter B'Kiveger, I don't need a Pesha Asua Pesha Yitter. What's the Machlaikis? The same Machlaikis as it says in the Trumas Akri. That Shavia Anavshe Chaticha de Yisura is not an Amanus on the story, Zakter B'Kiveger. It's only an Amanus on the bottom line, the fact that I'm Usser. I'm going to add a little point to this. You think about the words, Chaticha de Isura. Isn't that a very strange thing to say? A piece of Isser? What do you mean a piece of Isser? I mean, if we're talking about a piece of meat, so okay, I can understand we're talking about a Chaticha that's Mutares or a Chaticha Kshera, Chatichas Nevela. We have such a, but Chaticha de Isura, she's a Chaticha de Isura, he's a, what does it mean? Shavi Anavshei Chaticha de Isura. It's very much mashma like Rabbi Kiveger. If we're like the Ktsois, so then in each situation, when the Sheikhet says, this is Basar that's not Shchuta, it's Nevela. When this man says, Pesach Pesach Matzasi, and he's a Kayin, she's a Eshes Kayin, he's saying, she's a Suralai, she's an Isha Surah. When a man says, Ishti Zinsa, then he's Ne'eman that she was Mizaneh. So in each case, you're Ne'eman the content of what you said, and that's why she's Asr. But if you tell me, we don't believe the story, all we accept is the fact that you're never to say that there's an Isser on you. So then all the time, do I believe this is Basar Nevela? I don't believe it's Basar Nevela. But do I believe that you're allowed to eat the meat? Yeah, I believe you're not allowed to eat the meat because you said it's Basar Nevela. Since you said it's Basar Nevela, you're saying the meat is Asr. It's a piece of Isser. What's the name? There's no name. It's just a piece of Isser. That's as much as I believe. Says Rabbi Kiveger, I don't even really believe you. I simply have to accept what you've said about your status of Isser. Says the Trumas Hakri, if a person knows himself that an Isser happened, let's say he knows his wife was Mizana, and nobody else knows. So what are you going to say? Since nobody brought it up, he's mutter to live with his wife? Of course not. If he knows himself what happened, then it's mamish aser. So what's Basin supposed to do? Says Rabbi Kiveger. The guy comes to base and he says that Ishti Zinsa, not our case of Pesach Basua, but a man comes and says Ishti Zinsa, and there's no Edus and no nothing. But Shavyan Avshei, he's saying, I know she was on it. So you know what Basin does? Basin says, listen, we don't know. Says Rabbi Kiveger, we don't believe it's true. But once you said it, then we have to enforce it for you. So now we're going to make sure that you're not going to go ahead and live with this woman. So now, says the Rashba, Shavya Nafshei Chatichet Yisur works even against Eidim. Why? Because like the K'tzais, you can bring me 100 Eidim, it doesn't make a difference. You believe my story. If I said about myself, my story of Mammon, I owe $50, and two Eidim said, no, you don't owe $50. I still owe the $50 because when I say I borrowed money from that Yankel over there, you believe me that I borrowed money from Yankel. The Eidim come and say, no, we never said saw any money but getting borrowed from Yankel. So what? The Eidim come and go. He's Neman, Kimei Eidim. In Isser, the same thing. You're Neman on your own Isser, Kimei Eidim. So Zok the Rashba, the Sheikhet himself, he has to be Nayig Isser, even Malcolm Eidim. But if you understand that the Pshat is that it's simply that we have to be Nayig with you because maybe you know that it's Isser. Yeah, but once Eidim have come into the picture and they've made a statement, this Basar is Basar Shchuta, so now we know that this Basar is Basar Shchuta, we don't have to be Noig with you in Isser, and you don't even have to be Noig Isser. At that point, we can say the whole Isser is only as long as it's possible that you know something nobody else knows. But once Eidim have actually made a statement about it, so that statement is Al Pishnayim Eidim Yokum Davar, we now have a knowledge that this Isha is not an Isha Asura, and therefore she is not going to be Asura Lecha, and that would be the Mahalach of the Ritva, that a Nemonus, that a Mahalach of Edus would work to go ahead and be Mevatel Din of Shavi Nafshei Chatichet Yisur. So these are two Mahalchim, these are two ways to understand Shavi and Nafshei that are going to have many different expressions, many different nafkaminas. Is there going to be an Einish? Let's say a man comes in and says he's a Kayin. Right? I think we talked about this case last week. A man comes in and says he's a Kayin. So he wants to get the first aliyah, right? He doesn't get the first aliyah. If he comes in, he says he's not now. If there's a chazaka, so we have a chazaka, fine, right? But stam, person comes and says he's a kayin, we don't give him truma, we don't give him, right? But is he mutter to marry grusha? He's not mutter to marry grusha now. Shavya nafshei chatichet yisur. What happens if he marries a grusha? So the halacha is a kayin who marries a grusha gets malchus. Is he going to get malchus? If you say that Shavya Nafshi is din of a dust, but then Kimeya Eidim, and he's Neman, that he's Taka Kayin, Le'inyan the Isser of Grusha, then we're going to get Malchus. But if you tell me it's a Chaticha de Yisura, is he a Kayin marrying a Grusha? I have no idea. So how do you get Malchus? Malchus is halacha in Beis Din giving Einshin. Do you know what you're doing? You could be stam giving Malchus to a guy who didn't do an Isser. You can't do that. If it's negea to his Isser, meaning keeping him from being over an Isser, okay, so we help him to make sure that he's not over an Isser. So if down the road he says, you know what, that business about Kayin, I'm Chayzer. It's not. Bezin says, sorry, you already said you're a Kayin. You made yourself Asur and a Grusha. We can't let you marry this Grusha. But if he goes ahead and marries her, we're not going to give him Malchus because we don't know that you're a Kayin marrying a Grusha. But Zok the K'tzais, because it doesn't say this, but that should be Yitzah from the K'tzais. According to the K'tzais' Mahalach, yeah, we could go ahead and give an Einish. At least Malchus. In the case of Eishes Ish, if she comes and says, we think she's a Pnuya. She comes and says she's an Eishes Ish. And then somebody's Baal Leha, and we know that that's not the person who she claims she's an Eishes Ish from. Does she get Misa? Is it so he's going to say she's going to get Misa based on this? That's a big chiddush. But l'chayra, if you tell me that you believe Adam Neman al Ansma, if you tell me that you're Neman about yourself, then technically you should be Neman to the point of getting Misa. That it could be is different. There's a Gemara Kedushin about that. That we could talk about another time. But the point is to get in our minds. We started with one mahalach that Shavi Nafshei is halacha of neder. It's asering. It's not mistaver that's the mahalach of Shavi Nafshei chatichet yisura. A lot of problems. You have to have das less or she'ela should work. A lot of problems understanding neder. So we have two mahalchim: the K'tzais on the one hand and the Trumas Akri with the Kiveger on the other hand. Do we say that it's a halacha of nemanus like a hidas baldin in Beis Din, Or do we say that it's halacha of chaticha de Yisura, we'll call it. We're noyig Isser with you, ki'ilu we know, but we don't really believe what you said, and we're going to only enforce it in your world. Those are two different malachim understanding Shav and Nafshach B'Chiv Yisur. Okay, hold it.
Question about the Simon Bari, isn't it a weak Bari? and a strong
Because
Bari?
it's something that he's not going to know about.
Yeah,
Yes,
does that make a difference?
yes, it should make a difference. It possibly that only makes a difference if we're dealing with Cheskes Mom. And over here, the Chazaka would be on her side that she is a Cheskes Heter. So her Bari is actually going along with the Chazaka, whereas normally in the Bari Shema discussion, if he's a Shema, but he's got the Cheskes Mammon, so her Bari is trying to emitze from that, so then you have to come on to a Bari Toiv, not a Bari Garua. But it could be if the Chazaka is on her side, then it'll be easier. That's part of the cheshbon of how does Bari Shema apply to this Ninavis.
Yeah. But in a sense, the point that you made before, Rabbi, is very important. The notion of chaticha de Isura, it's not a complete Isura.
Right.
And
It's like
so-
a mixed
so-
Isura.
So the
right.
issue is when you have something coming to Beis Din wants to do two things. It wants to find out the truth,
Right. Is
and it wants to find out the mishpat.
Right.
Okay. So when we say Ishnei Edem or Shnosha Edem Yakum Davar, we're not saying Yakum Mishpat. We're saying Yakum Davar.
Right. The story.
Which means that the notion when you come to Beis Din is what you're looking for is truth.
Right.
And then you have,
And then you know what the halacha is. What's
and
the
then
psak?
basically what Beis
Right.
Din does
Right.
is it understands in its wisdom using this truth and using this halacha. What is the psak din?
Right.
When you have shavya nafshek tasura, what you're doing is not truth but status.
Right. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so what
That's
you're saying is, I don't really care right now whether he's
details.
telling me the truth or not,
right.
but he's creating for himself
Exactly.
status of Isura.
Right. Or not necessarily creating, because that's reminiscent of a ned there.
Okay,
but
he's
rather
establishing.
He is right. He's
He's
establishing the
establishing.
status of Issa, correct. That would be the two ways. The Ksais is understanding that you are believed on the details, and the Kiveger and the Trumas Sakri is saying, no, we're not getting into the
Right.
details. It's just the status of Issa. Yeah. Okay, good. Very good.
Good. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Okay.
Shabbat
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.